This is the Shadow Defence Minister, Andrew Hastie.
Richard Marles' ridiculous claim that defence spending is not bipartisan, especially since most of the increase has been due to AUKUS, which the Coalition established and continues to support. Under the Albanese government, the ADF will be worse off. There won't be a balanced force or a focused force. There will instead be a weaker force. Under a Dutton government, there will be clarity around the threats to Australia, our strategy to defeat them, and defence funding will be higher under a Dutton-led government than under an Albanese government. Thank you.
Mr. Hastie, on that last, just to clarify that last comment, does that mean you're committing to 2.4% of GDP on defence spending within a decade at least?
Yes, we are committing to more defence expenditure than the Albanese government.
2.4% or more.
Didn't Minister Marles today expose the fact that there was something like 40% of over-programming in the government that you were a part of, and today is about trying to address a whole lot of projects that were announced but not funded?
Richard Marles keeps looking in the rear-view mirror, and the Australian people need leadership from the Albanese government. We're not seeing it. If it is true that we are living in the most dangerous time since the end of the Second World War, then we need to be investing more in defence, not less. And what he announced today was an additional $72.8 billion worth of cuts, in addition to the $7.8 billion of cuts that he announced as part of the Defence Strategic Review last year, totalling more than $80 billion worth of cuts to defence projects.
Mr Hastie, you said he was pretty vague on the strategic threat, but he actually names China a few times. I mean, how's that being vague?
Well, sure. But authoritarian powers are the main threat to the US global rules-based order at present. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Iran's proxies in the Middle East, Hamas, Hezbollah and the Houthis. All of these threats directly impact Australia's prosperity and security. And I think he could have been much clearer about that point.
Do you support any of what you describe as cuts, what the government calls reprioritisation? Do you think there's anything that should actually be put aside so that military is focused on immediate concerns?
As you can appreciate, you had more of a briefing than the opposition. We will seek a briefing, and we're going through the documents now. From what I can read, I'm glad to see that there is a commitment to combined arms in the Army. The Army has had a tough time over the last 2 years under Labor. The Army has been made weaker by Labor, and so it's good to see there is a commitment to Abrams tanks, for example. But we're going to read this more closely.
Do you give Richard Marles any credit for getting more money for defence, including on the forwards, through ERC?
Well, again, a lot of that spending commitment, the $5.7 billion, let's break it down. $1 billion today, $1.7 for the surface fleet, and then $3 billion last year over the forwards, totalling $5.7 billion. Again, I think it was Ben Packham from The Australian who asked him about inflation and foreign exchange. He refused to answer the question. So that's a very modest increase when you consider the inflation that's hitting family budgets as well as the defence budget across the country.
Can I just clarify, in terms of that question about what the former government was trying to achieve in defence and whether or not there was enough money to do it, like the clear indication is that there was not enough money to actually deliver on the programs that the former government had promised. Do you acknowledge that there was a gap?
Labor won government in May 22. So they can talk about the past all they like, but the reality is that we still need, for example, the large vessel dry berth in Perth, particularly if we're going to increase our shipbuilding in Perth, but also for the maintenance that's going to be done routinely on US and UK ships and submarines as they pass through Perth. So that's just one example of where Labor has made cuts and not made a commitment to building that.
Mr Hastie, do you agree with the Defence Minister's suggestions that Australia can never be at the same level as our US peers when it comes to defence?
Well, just on basic population, of course. China's more than 1 billion people. The US is around 350 people. We're 26 million people. Of course, we're at a disadvantage in terms of numbers and mass, which is why we've got to have a focus on asymmetric capabilities as part of our defence strategy. That's what we should be talking about. I made a speech last week at the ANU where I talked about AUKUS Pillar 2 generating vice-like asymmetric capabilities that we can deploy against an enemy. And to use a very clear picture last week, I said we should be able to tear off the arm of an adversary if they come and threaten us or coerce us. That's the kind of imagery that I think people can appreciate. But impactful projection, Richard Marles, come on, you've got to do better than that. The Australian people are regular punters and they need to hear things very clearly and plainly.
With that in mind, that we can't be the same as the US in any sense in that way, do you then reconsider that the threats that you proposed before, being Iran and those in the Middle East, should they be a priority of Australia having a much smaller defence capability?
Are you saying we should have a smaller defence capability?
Should we?
No, we shouldn't. Absolutely not. Look, weakness is provocative. If you want to defend Australia, you've got to be strong. You've got to make people think twice about having a crack at Australia. And, Richard Marles today made the point that we are a maritime island trading nation. A lot of our imports travel across the ocean, as do our exports. And so what happens in the Red Sea does matter. We can't just pretend that we live in the Indo-Pacific and the rest of the world has no impact on us. Of course it does. That's why we committed under the former coalition government a lot of assistance to the Ukrainian people in their fight against Russia. We are part of the global order and we have a role to play. Thanks very much.
That is Andrew